And as always, we will record this on Monday, November 28th. We still have a few more items left. This is our last sort of story discussion, but we have a few more small items that you might be interested in. November 28th will be at 7 o'clock. It will be the Flannery O'Connor Memorial Lecture, which will be held in person here at the Milledgeville, on the Milledgeville campus. But if you wish to come, you can. And it's we will also live broadcast it and tape it. And it's Stephen Corey, who is a poet and former editor of the Georgia Review. Did you get caught in that big rain? A writer learns a few things from Flannery O'Connor. And then our other event coming up is a new event. It wasn't on the schedule originally, but we were lucky to be able to schedule on Tuesday, December 13th at 7 o'clock, a panel discussion we're calling Why Flannery O'Connor. And Dr. Gentry and Dr. Bob Donahue from Sam Houston State University in Texas, who are the co-directors of this summer's NEH Summer Institute here in Milledgeville, will be talking with 5 of our 6 faculty members from that institute: Dr. Carol Schloss, Dr. Farrell O'Gorman, Dr. Thomas Haddix, Dr. Christina Bieber-Lake, and Dr. John Lowe, about why do we study Flannery O'Connor, and what does she have to show us right now in the 21st century? And we'll be looking forward to seeing everybody there. It'll be a nice little Christmas send-off. And with that, without further ado, we're going to get that Thanksgiving ritual underway. And
here comes the turkey. What are you?
And Bruce Gentry will be discussing a late encounter with the enemy. And we're looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Bruce?
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is an early Flannery O'Connor story. If you look at the Driggers and Dunn volume that dates all of the composition periods, the earliest story in the collection is A Stroke of Good Fortune, because it was originally part of Wise Blood that she readapted into a story. But after that one, this is the earliest of her stories. She wrote it before The Life You Said May Be Your Own. She wrote it before The River. She wrote it before A Good Man Is Hard to Find. Still seems to me, like she's figuring out who Flannery O'Connor is as a short story writer. At this point, it's in some ways a little bit different from the typical O'Connor story, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about that if people want to, how this seems different. A few words about sources. Okay. One source is that something kind of like this story happened on the Georgia College campus. And this has been written up. This isn't anything I've done research on. I just read the article that was in the bulletin back in 1979. General William Gordon Bush was brought to Georgia State College for Women graduation ceremony, and was the hit of the graduation ceremony, and was written up for the local paper. And we know Flannery was looking at that newspaper, and the illustration that was in the Milledgeville paper is reproduced in the article that goes over all of this stuff. The funny thing about the illustration is that you can't see much of anything about the general's face. He's pretty much a white blank, which only seems appropriate. That Flannery would respond to that. It wasn't his granddaughter that he brought with him to the came with to the graduation ceremony. It was his wife. And But, true to the story, if Sally Poker Sasser expects the old man to be the hit of the show, he was. That's what got written up in the newspaper the next day, was that, oh my goodness, we had a Confederate general come to this graduation ceremony for a few hundred women who got degrees. No big deal. There was a Confederate general in the audience. Let's write that up. Schools put out these human interest stories all the time that are about the exceptional thing that had something to do with the event. It's not that odd. He did not die during the graduation ceremony, and the story was published before the real person, General Bush, died. There's some indication, I'm not exactly quite sure how to read certain lines in this article. Apparently the film premiere where General Bush was featured so prominently was for another movie about the South and the Civil War. And Flannery, having a few opinions about Gone with the Wind, she thought she might share with the world, decided to change that too and say, okay, his fondest memory was being at the premiere of Gone with the Wind and being given the uniform that he's wearing to the graduation ceremony. So Flannery's taking a real event and making fun of it, and she sets it on campus. When Flannery was going to GSCW, most of her English classes were in, I think it was called the English Building in those days. It's now called Lanier Hall for Sidney Lanier. It also happens to be the building that has this big auditorium in it where the graduation ceremonies used to be held. So, you can visit this space in Milledgeville and, imagine where the people are at various points in the story, and imagine that if you get a couple of thousand people in that space and they're all wearing heavy robes and it's hot. It could be enough that somebody would say, gee, it's just a wonder that we just don't die of a stroke in this auditorium. And so real easy to believe that somebody could die of the heat in this story. Okay, that's realism. Now, next source is, Edgar Allan Poe. Flannery, when she was first being taken seriously enough so that she was asked the question about who are your influences, would say, this person and this person and this person. But then she'd say, but of course, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but it's really true that the most important influence on me was the humorous tales of Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, my opinion about that is that's like classic short volume, the humorous tales of Edgar Allan Poe. Yeah, there were stories that were published that way, and there are volumes that, have that title. She's not making that up. They're just not very funny. I have tried reading The Fall of the House of Usher as if it were really just a big joke, not to be taken seriously. And it's another way to read The Fall of the House of Usher. You can find it mildly amusing if you give it a try that way. But the stories that Poe wrote that are his attempts at humor, just kind of prove that he was really good at other things. The story that Poe wrote that I can connect to one of her stories it connects to this O'Connor story. The late encounter with the enemy is pretty clearly a response to a story by Poe called The Man That Was Used Up. Doesn't have much of a plot. The narrator finds out that he's going to go to a presentation by a famous general, and he idolizes him after the presentation. He decides he's going to go backstage to meet the famous general, and he does. And, the rest of the story is the two of them in the same room together. And the general says, well, I've got to get out of this. I got to get out of this, uniform that I use for presentations. And so he takes off the uniform, and he takes off the glass eye, and he takes out the false teeth, and he takes out the artificial leg, and he takes out another piece and another piece and another piece and another piece. And the hilarious joke of the story is that that's all there is. He's just a big combination of fake parts. There's nothing real to the general. At the end of the story, nothing happens. It's just that the narrator realizes that the general is really just a little squiggle of living cells that's scuttling across the floor at the end, that there's hardly anything left of him other than the fake parts. And I'd say, well, if Flannery were put on the spot, show us where you read something in Poe that influenced some one of your stories. I think she'd have to resort to pointing to this. The next candidate would be a story that she mentions somewhere. She mentions remembering the spectacles. And there's some stories where eyeglasses matter. Holga has eyeglasses, and Judgment Day has eyeglasses in it as kind of crucial prop. What happens in the spectacles? This guy is too vain to put on his spectacles. He gets married. After it's over, he puts on his spectacles and he realizes he's married his grandmother. The end. Ha 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 ha. Poe has one punchline to his comic plots, and then he prepares for it, and then, and has his one joke. And, I can agree that Flannery will seem sometimes to be structuring a story that way, that she's going to hit you over the head with the baseball bat, and everything is preparation for that moment, so that's kind of a generalized, a generalized influence. Okay. And then the other thing, this is too perfect not to admit, even though it's probably not true. Let's think about Pogo. And, down in Okefenokee Swamp, Walt Kelly was putting out his comic strip about critters down in the swamp, starting in 1948. And it was widely distributed. It's easy to imagine that Flannery O'Connor would have seen that in a paper she was reading on a daily basis. Walt Kelly came up with this line to give to Pogo that is just perfect to apply to this story. So even if the timing is wrong, because I think the story was written in early 1952, even if the time, and I can't pin down when Pogo said this line. Well, anyway, Pogo is famous for saying, "We have met the enemy and he is us." And I think that's just right about the story. The late encounter with the enemy, you find out that the enemy is really what's inside the general himself, that he doesn't need to go looking around for somebody to have as an enemy. He's got it all floating around in his skull, and his chest. The original line was from a U.S. Navy commander in the War of 1812 who said, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." And I think, if Flannery saw Walt Kelly playing off of that kind of military line, that we know we're going to win, we know we're superior, we have all this self-confidence, and she saw that being turned around in a comic strip, I think she would just find that irresistible. She would have to work that into a story. But, you know, it might just be we have to call it literary criticism instead of calling it inspiration. He might have just gotten this story right without knowing, without having read Flannery O'Connor. And that's a wonderful line. We have met the enemy and he is us. So applicable to so many situations these days. I thought I had to bring it up, even if it's a little bit of getting off the subject. Okay, where shall we go next? Let's see. One other detail about the real story that Flannery, you know, picked up on and changed is that General Bush, who came to the graduation at GSCW, was noticeably dependent upon his cane. And that probably was an excuse for Flannery to get the bright idea, oh, let's have him have a sword. And that could be one more way for him to kill himself. You know, does he die because of heat stroke? Does he die because he squeezes his sword so hard that he's, you know, cutting himself open and bleeding to death at the end? There are various ways to make sure that the general is dead at the end. I never had anybody wonder what happened to him, you know, or having any doubt about whether that corpse is indeed a corpse. Okay. I'm going to talk about the general more than the other characters. Stop me if there's something that you want to emphasize about John Wesley Poker Sash or Sally Poker Sash. But to me, the most interesting character of the story is the general, and he doesn't like much. You know, he's kind of surprising in some ways. I think he, I mean, maybe he fits a stereotype of an old guy, you know, kind of sour on the world. Says that famous line, "Goddamn every goddamn thing to hell." I see as quotable by a number of people. He doesn't like much. He doesn't like history. He doesn't like the South. He doesn't like the Civil War. He doesn't like his family. He can't remember whether Lee is a person or a battlefield. He doesn't like any of it. He doesn't like the future either. He just wants to live in the now, you know, like what they say about goldfish, you know, they remember the last 7 seconds or something like that. I don't know how they know that. But anyway, he lives in the now. If you ever saw a character who lives in the now, I would say, well, he's probably it. Not a particularly appropriate symbol of the Old South. He's not somebody who's going to become, I don't know, a member of a Confederate organization. He's not going to do reenactments. He just wants to be in the spotlight. He just wants to be noticed. He just wants people to look at him. And he doesn't really care why. It doesn't, for him, it doesn't have any connection to any tradition. You know, all he cares about is the premiere of Gone with the Wind. And if you could have some more young women on floats paying attention to him, that would be great. I do not think that was a particular feature of the Civil War. So a lot of stuff that people think they're admiring when they look at him and act like they admire him, he has no interest in. And that's kind of an interesting trait of the old guy. That and the fact that he has a number of, you know, he has a number of good lines. He says things that are funny. I think the story is funny. Everybody else in the story seems to act like, maybe with the possible exception of John Wesley. He doesn't care about any of this stuff. But all the adults at the graduation ceremony act like General Sash is this monument to the Confederacy, and that they really do respect him. They put all kinds of meaning on him that Flannery is telling us isn't there. It's a Flannery O'Connor story, So once we decide that, here's a character we're going to pay attention to, we are, of course, trained by O'Connor to say, okay, where's the insight? Where's the revelation? Where's the epiphany? Where's the moment of grace? How are we going to make this be about religion? I've tried on occasion, I didn't do it today. I've tried on occasion to go through the story and say, now, can I make this be more like other O'Connor stories? Can I say that the general wants what's going to happen to him, even though he acts like he doesn't want it to happen to him? Can I make him like in Parker's back, who's running away and running away and running away, and then, finally is captured by what he wants to be captured by? And I don't know, I kind of give up. I kind of feel like when I do that with this story, I'm building a little house of cards, and by the end, I find I'm not really persuaded that the general is seeing these events more deeply, the way I tend to want to think other O'Connor characters are seeing things deeply. So maybe it's because of Gone with the Wind. Maybe Flannery O'Connor is just so bound and determined she's going to let Gone with the Wind have it, that this story is going to be pure satire. Let's just take apart that book, and more importantly, movie, that everybody in Flannery's time was holding up as the highest artwork you could possibly aspire to. It could be that she just wanted to make fun of it, make fun of everything that she could associate it with in this story. I do think that Pogo had it right, that the enemy he is battling is himself. It's internal. And nobody in the story particularly wants to fight him about anything. He's got to bring his own opposition with him to the party, to the battle, because nobody cares about him enough as an antagonist. They just want to honor him and then be done with him. They want to make their show of caring about something that like him or something that he represents, probably out of obligation, and then forget about him. It's kind of interesting to think about the end of this story. How long does it take before anybody notices he's dead? And what will they do when they notice he's dead? And what will happen to the lives of the other characters after he's dead? Will this be a momentous thing? I think the answer is no. That Sally Poker Sash will have a little more free time, but she'll keep doing what she's been doing, and I would imagine that John Wesley's not going to be traumatized by the experience. I keep campaigning that we ought to put up a Coca-Cola machine outside of Russell Auditorium on the Georgia College campus with a wheelchair beside it, so that we can encourage tourists to have their picture taken in the wheelchair where the general was dead. But the story makes us pay attention to him at the end more than anybody in the story is paying attention to him at the end. It's a very unmomentous ending. It's going out with a whimper, not a bang. And I guess that's the point, that it's just a joke. I've never heard anybody tell me with straight face that they thought this story ended sadly. Nobody ever says, "Oh, the poor man, he died. Isn't that sad?" No, the story's just saying, ha, 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 ha. Yes, he and everything he represents is gone. I once invited a keynote speaker for a conference to come give a talk, and I'd check in every once in a while and say, how's it going? What are you going to talk about? And the speaker said, I'm going to talk about Flannery O'Connor in the Old South. And I knew right away that was going to be challenging. And good. Yeah. I knew that was going to be challenging. I check in every once in a while, and there was the admission I'm having trouble coming up with anything for this talk on that subject. At which point I said, well, try talking about a late encounter with the enemy. See if that gets you going. I mean, I didn't say you picked a bad topic. That's not going to work. Well, the talk was given, and there were a few comments about a late encounter with the enemy in this speech, but mostly the talk ended up being about how interesting it is that Flannery O'Connor never talks about the past, never talks about the Old South. And she does a little bit, but that it's like the obvious topic for her to write about that she didn't write about. She writes about the South after World War II. She writes about people in the time when she's writing. She's writing about, and they have memories. But what are their memories about? They tend to be not about what really happened in the old days, but about the mythology we've all been fed by Gone with the Wind, and that whole school of Southern mythological history talk. And why? I mean, she's writing about now. She's paying real close attention to what's going on at Andalusia, and why not? And it's happening now, and so why shouldn't she concentrate on the now instead of the past? Another answer to why would she write about the past so dismissively? And the answer could be William Faulkner. She's got that famous passage where she talks about you got to stay out of William Faulkner's way, because he's the big guy. He's the Dixie Limited. And if you let your little mule and wagon get stuck on the railroad tracks when the Dixie Limited is coming through, it ain't going to be good. So don't compete with William Faulkner. She might have said, and since he is associated with, we never leave the past controls everything. All we do is recycle it, maybe farcically, but we never escape it. Better for her career to say, okay, I'll write about how nobody remembers the past well enough to be controlled by it. We really are maybe starting from scratch. Would that were true, but I think it's a decision that made it easier to finish a story, and there's something to be said for that. I did once find a couple of pages, I think it was, in special collections here at Georgia College, when Flannery was writing early drafts of the first chapter of Wise Blood, where I thought, she's trying to write like William Faulkner. She's talking about Hazel Motes on that train. I don't even know if his last name was Motes at that point. Talking about Hazel on the train. And she was getting really stream of consciousness, artsy-fartsy, kind of intentionally obscure and deep, like Faulkner makes work. The way he writes that is Faulknerian. And when she wrote it, it just kind of seemed like something she was trying out just to see what would happen, just to experiment. And that's the only passage in O'Connor's manuscripts that I've ever run across where I would say she's thinking about William Faulkner here. I think she figured out right away, I got to find something else that's my own. And I can testify, I don't know if this is everybody else's experience, but I mean, if this is like other people's experience, I once taught a graduate seminar with our Faulkner expert on campus, the stories of Flannery O'Connor and William Faulkner. By the end of the course, we were both waving little white flags. We were all saying, okay, that was interesting that they really don't have anything in common. And we'd go into class having assigned a Faulkner story and an O'Connor story or two. And we'd talk about, well, gee, those are completely different, aren't they? You know, once in a great while, we'd find points of comparison, but we could find points of comparison between any two writers. If we tried hard enough, my goodness, we're English teachers, we can compare anything. But, you know, we were constantly being confronted about how hard it was to say that there was a good reason to put those two together. I mean, it really is kind of an amazing thing. You would think that they'd have much more in common than they do. Okay, where else should we go with this? My favorite parlor game to play with this story. Yeah. Oh yeah, let's do questions. Okay, Sue confesses to having a picture of herself sitting with Faulkner's statue in Oxford. Okay, no, you shouldn't feel embarrassed about that at all. I'm ready to put the wheelchair by the back door with the Coke machine. I'm ready to put the tractor out at Andalusia, right there where you can lie there and have your picture taken as Mr. Gujak about to be run over by the tractor. You know, tourism is serious business, and we've got to preserve our literary heritage by making it pay, folks. Okay. Don't feel bad about having your, I'd make another trip to Oxford to have my picture taken with Faulkner's statue, you betcha. Okay, any thoughts on why she reused the name John Wesley in A Good Man Is Hard to Find? That's a good point, that she reused it. She used it first in this story and then recycled it in her most famous story. She hadn't had enough of calling somebody John Wesley. She had to do it again. And there are other John Wesley's, you know, references later on in her career. Methodists are perfectly fine people, and there's no reason to make a career out of satirizing them. And furthermore, Flannery is generally pretty nice to Protestants. They're much more worth writing stories about than Catholics, right? I mean, you know, a handful of Catholics in Flannery O'Connor stories. I'm saying that this good question that you asked, I don't really have a good answer for it, except to say that the Klein mansion, the house that Flannery lived in when she was going to high school and to GSCW back in the day, was separated from the GSCW campus basically by one building, and that was the Methodist Church. The school has now bought it and it's redone, and it's the Student Activity Center. But if you go into that, you go into that building, you can still see that, well, this was once a church. That you can tell from the way the windows are done and from the way the stage is that, you know, it was starting out to be a church. So every day she goes out of the house to walk to campus, and she's got to walk around the Methodist church to get to the closest crosswalk to go into the main entrance to the school. So why not think about John Wesley? Why not think about the Methodists as something to write about? And oh, by the way, John Wesley did have his, yes, there's a monument to him in Savannah because that was his headquarters. her birthplace was also John Wesley's headquarters. So why not rib him extra? Why not let him have it every once in a while, just for good measure? I used to make the mistake in the classroom of saying that for Flannery to walk from her house to the river, she would have to go by the John Wesley statue. And then somebody pointed out to me the date when that statue was built. Oops, she never would have seen it. But she knew that, this was John Wesley's town, not just her town. And that, the Catholics in Savannah were kind of an oppressed minority, and the Protestants had their way. So, she probably thought John Wesley was kind of a symbol of all the people who are in power. And I'm just this little old Catholic over here in Lafayette Square without a whole lot of power. Well, now that we're on the subject of Savannah, maybe I should also mention that you might be wondering why Sally Poker Sash's greatest horror is that at a crucial moment, she would look down and realize that she never changed out of her shoes into the fancy shoes she was planning to wear to the graduation. Oh my God, she's got on Girl Scout shoes. What could be worse? Well, the person who started the Girl Scouts lived on the same square as Flannery. And it's a tourist site. Actually, it's easier to get into the, what's her full name? Juliet something Low? Okay, you put it in the chat so we can all see
Juliet Low.
Juliet Low, okay. I thought her middle name was usually part of the way she's talked about, but maybe it's just Juliet Low. Yeah, you can go to her house and more easily than you can go to the Flannery O'Connor childhood home. And, I'm sure that was a big deal in her childhood. And that's my explanation for that, is that Girl Scout shoes means, oh, I'm acting like a child. I'm being found out as not really grown up as I want to pretend to be. I'm still just a child. How embarrassing. It's a nice little joke, and I think that Flannery was fond of making fun of Girl Scout shoes about as often as she would make fun of Methodists. John Wesley's and Girl Scout shoes pop up every once in a while as easy jokes. And I don't think they're, biting satire. I think they're little friendly jokes that don't mean harm. Not the kind of harm that she's directing at Gone with the Wind. I think that's another category of really trying to do a job on the object of satire. Okay. Next comment from Heidi. You want to say it about the question about the sashes? Oh yeah, Juliet Gordon Low. Yeah. What's your question about the sashes?
It's not fully formed, but it just seemed like their name, Sash, also had a lot. I mean, there just seems to be so many references to just the outward appearance. Like, I don't think I've ever met anyone as superficial and arrogant as the general. I mean, he's not even going to wear his teeth because he likes his profile better. Yeah, and he's 104. My great grandma lived to 104, but she at least was humble enough to wear her teeth. So yeah, I just think there's all of the, military always has a sash. Of course, beauty queens always have sashes as part of their pageantry. And of course, the Girl Scouts, I still have my sash when I was in Girl Scouts.
Good for you.
Boy Scouts, that sort of thing. So it just feels like there's something more there with that name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, no, I think you've said it. I mean, I was reminded today that sash sounds a little bit like bush, and she might have thought of that word because of the name of the original guy. And I would say, just to talk about clothes in general, it seems to me that Flannery's inclination always is to satirize. That, when you put on clothes, we are being pretentious. We're trying to cover ourselves up and make ourselves look like we're something other than what we really are. And I think she always thinks there's something false about it. And if somebody cares a lot about their fashion, what they're wearing, it's probably shorthand for they're deceiving themselves, and right, it's not long after this story that you get A Good Man Is Hard to Find with all the careful description of how the grandmother dressed herself and, how people will know when she's dead that she was a lady because of her clothing. That line in A Good Man matches up with what's in this story too. Okay, I thought we were going to hear your analysis of a late encounter with the enemy. Who was the enemy? Okay, yes, that's my next topic. All right. This is my parlor game to ask people to tell me who the enemy is. And I short-circuited the conversation by saying, okay, he's his own enemy. Everything is within him. But I'm going to read you the fascinating list of things that other people have come up with over the millennia. As I've asked this question more than once. The most recent answer I've gotten was Doug Davis, who gave a talk for Andalusia Institute the other day about O'Connor and science. And I don't know if it's in the taped version of his talk or whether this was just an offhand comment, but Doug said, well, of course, and late encounter with the enemy is the Coca-Cola machine. And that wasn't on my list. I got out the pen and added Coca-Cola machine to the list here. And, the appropriateness of that answer is beyond whatever. I think Doug was talking about how people relate to machines and he could be kind of against the machine, but just on a real, kind of obvious level. A late encounter is an encounter you have when you're late, when you're dead. And where does the general go after he's dead in the story? He gets rolled over to the Coca-Cola machine where, John Wesley is going to forget about him long enough to get his Coke. And so in a way, the ending of the story is what the title refers to. The big climactic encounter is with the Coca-Cola machine. And it's an encounter when he is deceased, when he is the late General Sash. And I think, well, that's so clever. That, of course, belongs on the list. Okay, here's the rest of the list. The enemy is the South, history, all other people, ancestors, teachers, stereotypes, the truth, words, guilt, death, vanity, memory, the mind, commercialism, publicity, God. Oh, is this a religious story after all? Modernity, movies, audiences, monuments, impotence. Of course, it's impotence. Okay, and then the most original answer I've gotten is William Faulkner. And I've already said things about William Faulkner to say, well, I guess I could on some meta level see this as a story about Flannery O'Connor's anxiety about William Faulkner and that he's kind of in the background. John Cox is the one who pointed out to me, does everybody know this, that the general is the same height as William Faulkner? Does everybody know that William Faulkner was 5'4"? I didn't know that, but John told me, oh, well, yes, anybody would catch that. Oh, okay, I guess I should have caught that. And he saw it as a sign that we were supposed to see the general as a stand-in for Faulkner, and O'Connor's satire on the general is, like how she feels about Faulkner. I don't think she disliked Faulkner, and Faulkner liked Flannery O'Connor. don't turn him away if he's, I think I read that he had wise blood in his house and he said, this is really good. To somebody, that's about all I know about their great relationship. In terms of reputation, let me also put in a word about Joyce Carol Oates. Joyce Carol Oates has been imitating and using Flannery O'Connor for decades. And it's kind of funny that she denies that there's any influence or similarity between the two of them. I think Joyce Carol Oates writes really well when she's using Flannery O'Connor. When Joyce Carol Oates put together the anthology that I'm going to use next semester for my American Lit class, the Oxford, anthology of the American short story, of course, you had to put a Flannery O'Connor story into the anthology, and she picked A Late Encounter with the Enemy. What a choice. Not Good Country People. Not A Good Man Is Hard to Find. Not Revelation. Not Parker's, but A Late Encounter with the Enemy. And, for years I've said to myself, well, I just got to keep going back to A Late Encounter, and I got to wipe the slate clean, and I got to try to re-experience it afresh, looking for what so impressed Joyce Carol Oates about this story, so that it needs to be considered worthy of representing. Yeah, sure. I'm sorry, I'm reading Sue's comment in the chat. Sure. Sentimentality is about the South, I would say, is definitely something that the story is attacking. And well, sure, and the general doesn't like it either. He doesn't even like how people worship him. He's not into what's going on with the rest of the crowd. There are moments when I kind of like his attitude, and it's hard to put my finger on what is it about him that makes me find him at all interesting. If he's just an object of satire, he's going to become kind of a flat, uninteresting character pretty soon. But I keep finding him interesting, and that might be what it is that he doesn't think sentimentality is anything he wants to associate with. He considers that the other, as does Flannery, just about the most unsentimental writer there ever was. Okay, so there's my parlor game. Now, we didn't really do
something to point out.
More comments. Sue, Heidi, y'all want to say what you said? I'm not sure everybody's looking at chat. Maybe I should not be reading these things.
I think one of the most poignant moments in all of O'Connor's work is the moment when Julian is thinking about the plantation home that was lost for him, and he thinks bitterly about that loss. That's so much more revealing than anything else in the story. And I pointed out to students because I always have students misread the story, and they believe that that the mother needs to be punished, and that's why she has the stroke, and even O'Connor needs to be punished for herself because she's guilty of racism. And but I always try to get them to see that deep kernel that is in Julian, and it's all about what he didn't receive from it. He would be celebrating it if it had left him in a good place. So and I just think sentimentality always, I think about her line about it leading to the gas chambers. And
yeah, and the house she lived in, the house on Green Street here in Milledgeville, it could stand in for the house that Julian's thinking about in that story. And I'm sure Flannery got, lots of practice being unsentimental about the house. And at the same time, she probably liked her home, and had some fond feelings for it. She just didn't want them to be anybody else's fond feelings. It was had bitterness mixed in there. Okay, so Heidi, you have the comment that would take us around to Sally for a bit. Yeah, you want to say that?
Sure, I guess I agree with, let's see here, who asked Pam about, I was trying to identify too, like, who was the enemy? And I realized that I think the enemy was different for the two main characters, the general versus Sally. And for Sally, I just felt like her enemy was just change. I mean, I can't imagine, having been a high school teacher myself before I was a librarian, like going to school every summer for 20 years to get that degree so that you can keep on teaching, but then be resolutely determined that you're never going to use anything that you learned in the classroom in your classroom. Like, just the irony of that, and that, here she was going to show up all of her classmates that she has suffered with for 20 long years since she was 42, right? By showing them, look at what my family has to offer the world, and to kind of, prop the general up literally and figuratively as really the justification for her.
So she hates the school. Yeah. She hates the school and she hates her education.
Yeah. I just found more with her, and her sense of shame that she had with the Girl Scout shoes, but the sense of pride, there was more depth there than I remember. So
yeah. And and she's got something of Flannery in her too. I mean, the Flannery's cynicism about education is easy to find, in essays and letters and anecdotes we've heard about Flannery in the classroom, kind of taking over the classroom and explaining to all the other students how wrong the professor is at this point. Wouldn't that be fun to have Flannery O'Connor in your class so she could, pick a fight with you on tell you that your idea for the whole course was wrong? And oh boy, what fun. And Sally's just a way for Flannery to vent a little of that cynicism. And Sally Poker is sure that she's going to win her battle against her enemy, right? This is the plot of the story, is how she won. She'll probably figure out a way to make the general's death into an even greater part of her victory over that college. That he fought and bled and died for her graduation. Once it was all wrapped up, and it's a completely different story. That's an interesting game to play with O'Connor. You put a male and a female in the same situation in a story, and you watch them go through the same things, and then you ask yourself, okay, what was this like for the male, and then what was this like for the female? And I think you'll always find out completely different experiences. And the story doesn't exactly insist upon that gap, but it gives you enough detail so that you can think about it on your own. The Partridge Festival is a story that I think of that way, that the male character and the female character are going through the same stuff, and at the end of the story they're stuck in the car together and looking at each other, and what he sees is not what she sees. It's those are two like opposite experiences. And so why shouldn't we do that with this? To say, okay, here the story is pushing us to think about what the general is going through, and then it's left us to say, okay, now what's this like for her? Maybe this is a happy ending for her. Maybe this is a battle won. Okay. Is that a good place to conclude? We won the battle for Sally Poker's.
I think so, Bruce. Before everybody leaves, I wanted to have a personal piece of information I want to share with everybody. We still have 2 more sessions left, but these sessions are what our reading group has always meant to me. And I wanted to let you know personally that I will be leaving the Andalusia Institute at the end of December. Good news is Andalusia Institute continues. Jordan Kofer will be the interim director. And then, but also the good news is I get to go home to Maine, to Aroostook, and opposite on the Kennebec River, opposite the Bath Iron Works, and work for nonprofits in a place that's not that different from Flannery O'Connor's Middle Georgia. Believe me, it always has felt very, very familiar and home-like. So thank you so much for your attention and your sharing and being part of our lives. This has been a great thing, and we're going to continue on next fall. So,
And I just want to add that your years here working with you has been one of the highlights of my career here, and I hope you have a great time in Maine, but you're going to be missed.
thanks, Bruce. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.